Hey you, it's Allison. I'm your grief educator and coach as well as end-of-life doula and guide. I wanted to share a little bit about this idea that grief is a lot like dominoes. Now, I don't know if you've ever played dominoes before. It has been a very long time since I've played dominoes. But I think what I loved more about playing with dominoes was actually playing with the domino itself and kind of creating like you stack them up and you push them down and you see them fall down in sequential order. That was actually more fun for me than actually playing the dominoes. Now, if someone could teach me how to play it, I'd love that. But until then, I think about grief in the way that, like it's a stack of dominoes. Our loss in our life can feel that way because one moment can topple the next domino, kind of setting off this cascade of emotions that we don't always fully understand. And so I wanted to equate that to like how is grief like dominoes? Here's the thing, grief is extremely complex and it's an emotional response to loss, whether we wanted that loss or not. And the thing about grief is that it's not just like one thing, it's a mix of emotions ranging from sadness and anger to even guilt and confusion. The thing about grief is that it's universal and it's something that every single one of us, from the time that humans were created, that we will experience grief. But the weird thing about grief is that it's also like really personal. No two people grieve in exactly the same way. And what's interesting too is that even if you have multiple situations or multiple losses, each time you grieve that will be very different as well. And grief doesn't always come from the death of a loved one. It can really arise from the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, sometimes even positive things like moving from house to house or state to state. Major life events and changes can also create grief. I had a client that was a newly married person, and while very happy, that they were marrying the love of their life. Lots of changes came from that. And there was a grieving process through all of that. It's our mind and our body's response to losing something or someone important to us. And so understanding our grief and what that looks like, what it means to us, is really kind of that first step towards navigating the challenging journey of grief. And it's not just something that can be fixed or rushed through or check marked off. It's truly a process, it's a journey. And sometimes grief can be a lifelong companion. So I want to invite you to take a moment for some self reflection in identifying grief for you. So grab your journal or a piece of paper, or if you're a typer, get out your Word document and or Google Sheets or Google document. And so I would like for you to consider this. In your own words, how would you define grief? If you were talking to an alien who knew nothing about human emotion, how would you define grief? How have you experienced grief before, even if it was a positive situation? And what did that feel like for you? When we write down our thoughts, it can really help us process and explore our emotions and understand our own grief more deeply. And sometimes words can feel really hard to come by, and that's okay. If you aren't ready for the words, or if maybe words just isn't your forte, go and grab a couple of magazines or print some things off of pictures that represent your grief. Often, when I do workshops and I talk about grief, I usually start off with a grid of pictures. And I'll ask people, when you look at these pictures, which of these pictures, and it can be one or more, would represent what grief means to you? And that often helps people get really a lot more in touch quickly, but also like really opens up their mind to what grief is for them. And so that's the funny thing about grief is there's also just not this neat explanation. I mean, we could look it up in the dictionary. It's very, logical, but grief is emotional. And so I want to share with you this quote by Washington Irving. There is a sacredness in our tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition, and unspeakable love. Our grief is powerful because love is powerful. And just like dominoes, we can stand up again, one step, one domino, one moment at a time. So, if this message resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that I'll be sharing about grief, end of life, loss, love, and life. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. I'd love to hear your comments.